Now, it's been 6 days since the declaration of the presidential election results that handed William Ruto the title of president-elect. There remains just 1 day for anyone aggrieved by that decision to file a case at the Supreme Court, failure to which William Ruto will become the 5th president of the Republic on the 30th of August this year. Good evening. My name is Sam Gituku, and this is the state of the race. I am in studio with polling experts Angela Ambitho from Infotrack Research and also Samuel Muthoka from Ipsos. They'll be helping us go through the voting trends from the general election and what changed between the opinion polls and the actual polls. And let's begin by looking at the election outcome that, based on the results that were announced by one of Wafula Chebukati, the IEBC chairperson, and also the returning officer of the presidential election. William Ruto secured 7.17 million votes, representing 50.49%, while Raila Odinga was second with 6.94 million votes, equivalent to 48.85%. For George Wajakoya, he got 0.44% of the vote, while one David Moore secured 0.23%. And let's pack these figures here. We'll get back to them. But for now, let's focus on what has been happening and the outcome, or rather the opinion polls as of the very last surveys that were given by the different researchers. And I'm talking about Infotrack Research, I'm talking about TIFA Research and Ipsos Research. Of course, you'll see that they had different figures, but they agreed on who was going to lead the election outcome. And on average, they were saying that one Raila Odinga would be ahead with 48.3%. William Ruto was coming in some 7 points behind, and then George Wajakoya was securing 2.3%, while David Mora Wehiga was securing 0.23%. You'll see that the undecided voters were 7.6%, but obviously there were different numbers, including Ipsos putting it at 9%. Now, at the time of the survey, the Ipsos survey said that Raila Odinga is poised to win based on how he impresses undecided voters in Western, Coast and Central, that is specifically in Nyandarua. And according to Ipsos, undecided voters were 9% as of the August 2nd release. And Ipsos further said if Dr. William Ruto converts all, that is 100% of the undecided voters, he will force a rerun. Well, today, Ruto is the president-elect, and Samuel Muthoka is here. He's the director at Ipsos. What changed between the 2nd of August and the 15th of August?
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you for the invite. Let me first retaliate that the opinion polls were given to show voter preferences at the point at which they were carried out. And I think there was a good intention by also our sister pollsters to show trends. There was a point in time where it had all come from. According to the legislation that guides opinion poll in this country, no poll is supposed to be published 5 days before the election.
Right.
And we have a very good clarity about that, because when we ask voters about who you're going to vote for, it is usually as at today. Now, there was a reason why the legislation was made so that it has a window period of about a week. And all of us know, and it's common sense and common knowledge, that a week in politics is a very long period of time. And that is why it was very, very clear when we did the analysis of our numbers. One of the things that we put very, very clear was that with 7 days to the election day, the race still had tangible twists and turns. Tangible twists and turns. And of course, what we get there are a number of scenarios. This could happen based on, so we gave a scenario of if voter turnout would be normal. When I say normal, of course, when we sat here in this table and talked about voter turnout, we thought it could be as high as 78%, looking at previous elections.
Right.
But now with a voter turnout of 65%, in fact, as low as 41% in Mombasa, then looking at also the number that we gave as undecided voters, because at the election day, there were no undecided voters. So looking at the undecided voters, and then looking at the low voter turnout, in fact, we did predict very, very clearly that voter turnout would call the election. Voter turnout would call the election. And then we gave scenarios of how undeclared voters would sway. But finally, before I switch off to my colleague, please allow me to say this, that in the last 15 years, when opinion polls have been done, in fact, we have not had an opinion poll in Kenya that has predicted the outcome of an election. In fact, the last, this opinion poll almost spoke about the same thing. The numbers were so very, very clear. The last opinion poll that predicted a national activity, right, or a suffrage, a national suffrage, right, was the referendum of 2010, when an opinion poll clearly predicted that there will be this side that will get this amount, and in fact, very, very close to the elections. So 15 years, okay, no opinion poll as clearly predicted. I'm talking about the opinion polls that have been published. Okay. Everybody has an opinion poll out there.
Okay, those that have been published. Well, if you look at this, actually, it's only David Maure who was correctly projected, 0.23% about the opinion polls. And when you look at the results, it's actually 0.23%. But Angela, during your poll releases that you made between the month of May and the final one towards the end of July, early August, consistently Raila Odinga was leading. Is there something that you didn't see, maybe in your methodology, or something that could have changed on the actual day of voting that maybe you didn't see?
Sam, I think let's be clear on one thing. Polling is a science. It's a science that follows certain dictates. The dictates are not different for Sam. They will not be different for this Sam. They're the same for all of us. So when you ask the question, were we showing Raila as leading, I would say it was because the science as we were using it in terms of sampling and the questions asked was such that unless you were doing something extraordinary, the results would be more or less the same within a margin of error. So between May and May and August of this year, I presume every pollster was showing the same thing. Perhaps pray for those who were using a very different method from the conventional method. And there are pollsters who are using methods that were not conventional and were pointed out. But if you used the conventional methods, then ideally, your results, as you can see there, should more or less be the same.
Well, okay.
Within the margin of error. Yeah.
All right, we'll get back to more. I want us now to focus on what TIFA specifically found. They did something, they excluded the undecided voters and projected that Odinga would secure 53% of the vote. And but they put a rider and said that this in no way, these results can in no way be said to predict the presidential election's outcome. And we reached out to Tom Wolf, who worked with us for the 6 episodes before the election of this show, but he couldn't join us as TIFA is still analyzing the election data from the IEBC. And of course, there's something else to look at now is on the regional trends of what has been reported or what has been found from this election. And I want us to look at this because you'll find that, for instance, this is what the pollsters had projected that in Central Rift, well, for InfoTrack research, they referred to it as North Rift, different counties, but you can see William Ruto was in the lead with 75%, 64% for InfoTrack. Then, of course, Raila Odinga between 19 and 30% for the two pollsters. Then South Rift, you can see 45% versus 62%. Again, South Rift for InfoTrack includes Bomet and Kericho. For TIFA, it's just Narok and Kajiado. You can see how it compares. Then for Coast, you can see 20% under TIFA for William Ruto, 29% under InfoTrack. And for TIFA, for Raila Odinga rather, 67% by TIFA and 58% by InfoTrack. Then Lower Eastern, this is in Ukambani. William Ruto was projected to secure 28% by TIFA, 19% by InfoTrack. For Raila Odinga, between 64 and 71%. In the Mount Kenya region, 62% to up to 66% for Raila Odinga. Almost the same, 24% to 25%. To continue with the assessment of the regions, in Nairobi, it was projected that William Ruto would secure between 33 and 37% by both TIFA and InfoTrack. For Raila Odinga, between 53 and 57 and 55. 57 is the figure he secured eventually. Northern region, 39 to 35. For Raila Odinga, 55-55, quite the same. Nyanza region, 15 to 14 for William Ruto. We'll be seeing how that compares. For Raila Odinga, it was between 75 and 79%. Then for Western, 27% versus to 29, while for Raila Odinga, it was 61 by both Infotrack and TIFA. Let's look at what exactly happened in terms of, when you look at that Ruto secured the upwards of about 70%, hitting highs of 84% of the vote in parts of Kirinyaga, which I'll be looking at shortly. Let's just look at it so that we understand between those figures by the opinion polls and eventually how they were able to attain. And I'll be looking at this map. For instance, if you had to look at Kirinyaga, it was projected in Mount Kenya that William Ruto would secure 62%. He secured 84% of the vote. Raila Odinga didn't secure 24%. He instead secured 14.53%. If you look at a county like Kiambu, he came close. He actually got to the margin of 24% because he secured 25.52% in Kiambu. That is Raila Odinga. William Ruto getting 73.49%. Then a county like Murang'a County, you see that he still didn't hit 24%. Instead, he settled at 17.49%. For William Ruto, securing 81.68%. But then there's something else that I would want you to look at. If you look at the strongholds of the two different candidates, for instance, in Lamu County, the voter turnout was 62.56%. Raila Odinga secured 52.25%. So William Ruto getting 45.69%. But there's a unique county here called Mombasa County. The voter turnout was just below 44%. William Ruto got 41% against projection of just around 37%. Then you see Raila Odinga securing 58% of that vote. Again, you look at another stronghold. This is Kwale County. 54.95% was the voter turnout. Raila Odinga securing 70.13%. If you look at a county like Taita Taveta, this was among the highest in the coastal region, 16.87%. But then compare that to regions like Migori County. This is a voter turnout of 74.49%, with William Ruto getting 15% as projected based on the Nyanza region votes. But it changed when you look at a county like Homa Bay. The voter turnout was 73%, close to 74%. William Ruto got less than 1%, again, of the projection of the pollsters. If you look at a county, well, I just lost that. Gosh. Let me just look at... so
many figures, I don't know what...
This is Kisumu County. The voter turnout was 71.46%, and William Ruto got 2.32%. How do you explain those differences? Let me begin with you, Angela.
Are there big differences, Sam? You've taken us through so many numbers
yes,
that you're not being very fair to us. But having said that, let me start off with this place that you showed us first. Mm-hmm. You're showing us another pollster's figures without undecided, correct? And ours with undecided.
No.
You're comparing apples with oranges, or are these?
No, this one has the undecided still.
So this is with undecided, and
yes.
What you're saying is that they marry more or less.
Yes.
But what you want us to now comment on mm-hmm. is what the differences are here, mm-hmm. and the differences here mm-hmm. are not taking into account the undecided vote. Mm-hmm. That's point number one. Okay. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that if you look at our map, which I sent you, and the IEBC map of who won where, mm-hmm. there's almost no difference. Mm-hmm. Is there?
There is the global map here.
Yes.
Just look at it.
There's almost no difference.
Mm-hmm. There, this.
Correct. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, there are certain things that we could not anticipate with that person who told us they're undecided. However, what are the similarities? So that we're talking from the perspective of what polls are meant to give us, which is an estimation at that point in time. You've mentioned Kiambu mm-hmm. and you've mentioned Kirinyaga. Luckily, I have my numbers here. Sure. In Kirinyaga, we said mm-hmm. that Ruto was going to get 73%. Mm-hmm. We then postulated that he may end up with between 75 and 80%, mm-hmm. simply because the running mate for Raila was coming from Kirinyaga. But we could see that the traction was not very high. Right. It ends up that he got 84%. Am I surprised? No, it's not surprising. Mm-hmm. What surprises me more is the turnout. And I think it's important to say this because There we have a turnout of, is that 70%?
Yes, that's 70.
And when we sat here with you last week, we had all, including those who were representing the other side when we were in another show, had said we felt that turnout in the mountain was going to be lower than, comparatively lower than other regions. So in that regard, as pollsters, we then say, hey, wait a minute, something could have gone wrong. It could have gone wrong, or indeed it is a question that needs to be asked because it is something that we had postulated that could happen. So if Kirinyaga, for instance, had a turnout of 70%, which is 69.87, then that is interesting. It's wow, but that's not what we had anticipated would happen. But in terms of who was going to win, without going into nitty-gritties, because indeed it is consistent.
Right.
It is also consistent in Kiambu. Indeed, it is consistent if you look at the map for the whole of the mountain region.
Okay.
We said that the mountain region was an indisputed Ruto stronghold.
Right.
He was going to take the whole of that region. We also said that if Azimio were lucky, even with all the activities that they had done, in my estimation, if they were very lucky, they were going to end up with 25%. That would have been wonderful for them.
Okay.
But we have seen that that's not what they've gotten. But that is on, it was going to be best case scenario. We also said that there were places that were going to be complete strongholds for Azimio, just like you're seeing there. Pray for what we called our swing or battleground counties. One of the battlegrounds initially was Kajiado. And in our last poll, we realized that it was no longer a battleground. Indeed, we sent you the data after we had done the map, and that became an Azimio, stronghold.
Right.
And Raila, I believe, won in that area. We also, for the longest, said that Marsabit and Isiolo were swing or battleground. We now see that both Marsabit and Isiolo have gone to, in terms of majority, to William Ruto.
Right.
One of the areas in Western that we said was going to be an issue was Bungoma. Has it changed?
Yes, it has.
No.
63, close to 64% for William Ruto, 36% for Raila Odinga.
And we said it was a battleground. It never changed. It was going to be a battleground depending on who would woo.
Okay.
We also then said, and this is something that I think is important to note, which pollsters cannot guess, we can't postulate, we can't predict. When on a day of the election, 24th hour of the election, you then come up with an announcement that says, Mombasa will not have gubernatorial. Kakamega will not have gubernatorial. And 73 or 74% of Kenyans are telling you that devolution means a lot to them. You have disenfranchised the voter. We didn't know then what the turnout would be, Sam, when we sat here with you around midnight.
Right.
But you now see that Mombasa, it means that if you do such things, you disenfranchise the voter. So it meant that we couldn't have known that in Mombasa, last election, the turnout in Mombasa was 59%. Why was it 59%? Because there was the issue of MRC. So there was all this, insurgency. And we knew that, yes, in 2017.
Okay.
Okay? But then this time round, we thought all factors left constant. There's a lot of interest in the gubernatorial race. The lowest it would be is 70%. It turns out at 44%.
Okay.
Which tells us that if you do not have elections that people are prepped for, and you actually then remove certain elements that then confuse the voter, it disenfranchises the voter, and it also affects voter turnout, which it did.
Okay, I'll get back to you, but Sam, I want you to chip in on this, because if you look at those counties, Mombasa County, turnout went down to 43.7%. Like Angela says, in 2017, it was 59.45. In 2013, it was 65, close to 66% of turnout. But coming back to the year 2022, you look at a county like Kakamega, it settled at 60.3%. In 2017, the turnout was at 74.4%. 61.9%. Do you think this turnout had a big impact on the overall outcome of the election, especially when you look at the strongholds of Raila Odinga, the coast, Ukambani, Nyanza, versus the strongholds of William Ruto in the mountain as well as in the rift areas?
Sam, what you're saying is absolutely true. But please allow me to point out that I think we also seem to have an inherent challenge in the way we are interpreting the numbers. Because we are looking at a sample survey and comparing to a census. And then there are things that are in the sample survey which we very, very clearly talked about, because every sample that is put forward has always a margin of error. So when you look at our report, the Ipsos report, we even went further and broke down this, the specific regional samples and added a margin of error. In fact, a margin of error for each particular region. And over and above that, so we have the sample size and margin of error. And then the way in which we are interpreting the numbers. So if there's an undecided voter, you add the undecided voter, and then, of course, you apply the margin of error. And you will find that the numbers actually make a lot of sense.
Right.
Actually make a lot of sense. For example, when you look at Nairobi region, we predicted, for example, at the point at which we did the opinion poll, which was a whole week before the election happened, we thought that Raila would get 60%. He got 57%.
Right.
There were 6% undecided voters and a margin of error of ±3. So even if you took the margin of error plus the undecided voters, he is right within that margin. In Mount Kenya, we predicted that he would get 21%. Actually, he got 20%, most like for like. In South Rift, for example, we predicted he would get 52%. He actually got 52%.
So South Rift,
that was both South Rift was the two counties, that is
Narok and Kajiado? Exactly.
And then also when you go through the other regions, you'll find that our prediction is quite within the margin of error plus the undecided vote.
Okay, we'll get back to more. And I now want us to take a look at some things that have been happening. And that is specifically, according to the official figures from the IEBC, 14.21 million voters are, or rather at the valid votes, there were 113,614 rejected votes. Put together, that gives you 14,326,751 voters, and that is a percentage of 64.8% in terms of the voter turnout. We'll keep that there, but now focus on the pollsters had projected that the possible voter turnout would be at 85% by Ipsos. Infotrack had projected 79%, but obviously you can see the actual voter turnout was 64.8%. And of course, looking at that, we have already spoken about the turnout and how important it was. And I would want us to look at the election week. There were some slip-ups that we picked up from the tabulation of the voter turnout and other mathematical problems. And we need to listen to what some of the commissioners that were speaking during the election week were saying about the turnout.
I repeat, as at noon today, 6,567,869 Kenyans had turned up to vote. This equates to 30.65% of the total 22,120,458 registered voters.
Right, of course, IEBC put that figure of 6.56 million voters at 30.65%. But we know that in actual sense, that should be 29.69%. That is, if you calculate to get that figure. I was hoping that I would find it here, but on the same day, IEBC communicated that by 4 p.m. of the election day, 12.06 million voters had turned out to vote. Listen.
At allowed 4 p.m., 12,065,803 registered voters out of 22,120,458 had cast their votes. This equates to 56.17% of voter turnout, excluding voting through the manual register.
Well, of course, you can hear from Commissioner Wanderi that was equated to 56.17%. But if you had to calculate this based on the population of voters, which is 22,120,458, it gives you 54.54%. Again, that's more than 1.5 percentage difference in terms of the calculations by the IEBC. But on the same day, IEBC communicated that is Wafula Chebukati, actually the following day on the 10th of August, Chairman Wafula Chebukati provided conflicting numbers of the voter turnout within some 17 minutes. Listen.
But from the kits that transmitted, the voter turnout is 65.4%. This figure will go higher once we compute the verification of the turnout in areas that did manual voting.
Just for clarity, I was given the figure of 64.6% voter turnout represents 14,164,561 voters. 64.6% represents 14,164,561 voters. And of course, this figure will go up once we get the data of those who voted manually.
Well, 17 minutes apart. So the voter turnout changed from 65.4% to 64.6%, perhaps after review by IEBC staff assisting the chairman. However, when expressed in absolute figures of 1,164,561, that still didn't translate to 64.6. And based on known total registered voters, that should have been 64.03%. And this didn't include voters manually identified, and most of them in parts of Makueni and Kakamega counties. Now, the final voter turnout, according to the official figures released by IEBC, settled at 64.8%. Now, the two of you, why should it be so difficult to calculate a simple figure of voter turnout, which is easy, I guess, to determine? Angela?
Sam, we discussed this yesterday, and I don't understand it, because this is not even statistics. This is the basic math your kids and mine do. It is taking the total number of registered voters and then taking the people who you have seen as, people who have voted, based on what I believe the returning officer, Mr. Chebukati, mentioned as him relying on the KIMS kit. So if he was relying on the KIMS kit, then he already had that information with him on the go. I think that's why we wanted that there. So it was, you've calculated it correctly, and they should have calculated it correctly as well. I think if the question as well that we should then be asking is, have we now included the manual?
By that time they were making the announcement, it was not inclusive of the manually identified voters.
So is the manual only 48,466?
Well, from my calculation, based on the final figures, it comes to about 162,000. This should be the people identified manually, majorly Makueni, Kakamega, of course the rest of the country.
Right. And so then, because he said 14,164,561. Mm-hmm. That was his last announcement.
Right.
The total turnout, valid votes, was 14,213,027,
right,
plus 113,614, which comes to 14,326,641.
Right.
641, and that's the one that comes to 100 and something thousand.
Yes, 162.
162,000. So those are the people who voted manually confirmed. But it is your calculation as Sam, because IEBC has not given
yes,
us
based
that.
on my calculation.
This is Sam's calculation.
Right.
And my thinking was that how do you calculate the number of people who have voted? You have the KIMS, and you have, KIMS is the fingerprint, mm-hmm, and so it is automatic. And then in areas where you have exception is where it has not worked, then you would have had that person go to a manual register. Mm-hmm. So at the close of voting, when you start counting, the first thing you do because you want to ensure that everything that you count from the box is equivalent to the number of total people who went to the polling station, is that you then cumulate and you tally the total number of people who came out. That should be the first thing that you do. It can't be as something you do in hindsight, because you're going to be tallying your total number of votes, so many for Raila, so many for Ruto, so many for Wajakoya, so many for Wahika, and all that has to equate to 100, which includes the manual vote. So the manual vote cannot be something that you tell us in hindsight.
Okay. And Samuel, how important is this then, especially the figures that the commissioners gave to the country versus what ultimately is in the official declaration of results?
Let me first say that, you know, the constitutional threshold for winning this election, or for, you know, the winner was 50% plus one, not 1%. One vote. And you understand how one vote becomes very, very important. Even if that one vote represents a 0.0000 whatever percent, you understand how that one vote becomes extremely very, very important. And this is a situation where we not only require consistency, but also a process that is completely error-free. And let me say this for the record, that this was a very expensive election. And in a situation where we are spending 44 billion shillings, definitely, and the people who love numbers like me, we deserve to see better consistency and an error-free process, because the winning is about 50 plus one vote. It's not about, the issue is not about many votes. So when you see numbers that, you know, they are neither here nor there, and of course I wouldn't want to comment much about how it was being done, but from where I sit as a layman, it is all about the consistency with which this is done and presented so that it is error-free.
Okay. I hear you, Sam. And of course, there was that small matter of the place value of a zero and percentiles of numbers by IEBC Vice Chair Juliana Cherera. Our own calculation here indicates that 0.01% should translate to 1,421 votes. That is out of all the valid votes. And I'm sure you've had a field day having to discuss about that. Now, some of the pollsters pointed that the key issues of this election were employment, corruption, prevention, and education access. Central to all that was the cost of living. On one hand, Raila rode on a freedom is coming mantra, or rather, yes, freedom is here mantra, while William Ruto championed freedom is coming. And this is it. And of course, Ipsos was able to capture that in saying that Raila representing a legacy, while Ruto was representing hope as a candidate. Now, did issues truly determine this election? If I may begin with you, Sam.
I think we saw a very concerted effort from both you know, sides in trying to drum up critical issues, in as much as those issues were emotive. But at least for once, we saw a campaign that was about issues. And of course, you know, Mgalamu and Haki Umpe, we need to congratulate these two sides that for the first time they treated Kenyans to some real issues. And it is very true. The issue of employment was very much drummed up, really, on both sides. The issue of corruption came out very, very prominently. How do we stamp out this vice? It came out very, very prominently.
Do you see them in the results? Do you see those issues in the results? In the outcome, rather?
In the outcome of the election. You know, this is what one party was, you know, out telling the members, and this was their manifesto. This is what they sold. The other party that sold hope talked much about, you know, employment. It's about empowerment. It's about lifting, you know, the masses out of, you know, poverty and such. And I think this rhetoric played out. You would see it out there. And Sam, please allow me to say this. You know, when we do opinion polls, one of the things that we normally say is that all factors holding constant. All factors holding constant. And there's only one very simple question that we can want to pose to anybody who wants to interpret these numbers. Did the factors hold constant between the time that we did the opinion polls, the 7 days that followed the campaign period, the electoral process, and the counting up to that point that the results were announced. I would not want an answer at this point in time.
I would not want to reopen the conversation, but when you ask me that, you're polling the same people went out to vote. So what's this constant that you're talking about?
Of course, when you talk about, factors holding constant, for example, it's fair enough to think about, 5 or 6 places that did not have an opportunity to vote for a candidate that they wanted. That cannot be anticipated. It was not part of the factors that, we thought could influence quite a number of things. But what is the influence of something like that? That Mombasa residents walk up to go and vote for a governor, and then maybe the day before or on the day they discover that we cannot vote for a governor. Kakamega as well. Rongai as well, voting for an MP, and quite a number of, the other places that we are. Some of those things, which we look at factors that came up actually, and they are able to influence voter turnout and also voter behavior.
Okay. All right. Angela, from your assessment, was it about, do you see the issues in the outcome, or it was still the ethnic mobilization, regional mobilization, and closeness to political parties?
I think issues resonate with the public, but when the rubber meets the road, you vote for that person who you trust the most. The person you trust the most has mirrors your own behavior, your own culture, and your own aspirations. Who is that person likely to be? In many cases, that person is likely to be someone from your own tribe, someone from your own religion, someone from your own area. Because you believe that that person understands you better than somebody else and will have your back. This is what we have seen from the numbers that we now see from IEBC, and even the ones we saw from our own polling, that issues were critical and they would mention them, but they wanted their people, their man, to deal with those issues, because they believed that if they talked about the issues that mattered to them, that pinched them, whether it was high cost of living, whether it was corruption, whether it was development, whether it was access to water, education, etc., that this person would understand it better and ensure that where they come from or where they reside, that person would treat them more favorably. Indeed, Sam, when we see today, and let's call the spade, you hear people already saying, our side has won, so we are going to benefit. And the other side is not going to benefit. This is not the Kenya that we envision in the Constitution. However, it's the Kenya that we have. So that today, there are people laughing and saying, so-and-so is going to get an appointment, and we now know. And we've seen leaders saying it, that now we will have the roads that we've always wanted.
Okay.
Now we will have the resources that we've always wanted. What are they talking about? This is not a Kenya for one part. Okay. This is a Kenya for all Kenyans. And I think if we start thinking that way, then it wouldn't matter who wins the election. Unfortunately, that is not the Kenya we reside in.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's now look at the road ahead. These are the men and women that have the responsibility in charge of the transition process. The team is known as the Assumption of Office Committee, of course, established by the law, and the acting secretary to the cabinet, that is Joseph Kenya up there, is the one leading this team. It also includes the Attorney General. It has the CS of Interior, Fred Matiang'i, PS of Interior, that is Karanja Kibicho, Julius Muya from Devolution, he's the PS there. Juan Macharia Kamau from Foreign Affairs is the Principal Secretary, Jerome Ocheng from ICT, of course, Robert Kibochi, the CDF, that is the Chief of Defense Forces, and then you also have Philip Kameru from the NIS, Hilary Mutiambai, the Inspector General, Kiruthi Mbogwa, who is responsible for State House, and Anne Amadi, who is the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, and will be very instrumental in the swearing-in process. And also you see representatives of William Ruto, that is one Gladys Boss, Veronica Maina, as well as Justin Muturi, the Speaker, but of course in that team with a different responsibility. Their work is to facilitate the handing over process, to also security of the president-elect, and by extension the deputy president-elect. The responsibility is to organize facilities and personnel for the president-elect, to coordinate briefings of the president-elect and facilitate communication between President Kenyatta and the president-elect, in this case, of course, President Kenyatta being the outgoing president at the moment. But before all that can happen, there's a process that the country is waiting for. These are the 7 men and women at the Supreme Court that have the responsibility of obviously hearing and determining a petition against the presidential election. The final day of presentation is tomorrow. If Azimio la Umoja movement indeed makes good its promise to file a petition, they are the ones that will be looking at that, and they are led by Justice Martha Koome, who is the Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court. And this is why they matter. Should Azimio la Umoja again make that promise real, then President Kenyatta should retire on the 30th of August. That is, if the election of President-elect William Ruto is upheld, and that filing must happen by tomorrow, 2 p.m. If that petition is found to be invalid, or rather is thrown out by the court, then again William Ruto will be president. But should they agree with the petitioner within 14 days so that the judgment is given by the 5th of September, then we should be going back to the polls by 4th of November so that we can know the state of the race. And this brings us to the end of the State of the Race for the night. I want to thank my guest here, Angela Ambitho from Infotruck, Samuel Muthoka from Ipsos, for making time for us to have this conversation. Thank you so much for your insights. And see you next Sunday, of course, with another episode of State of the Race. Kenya's Choice continues after the break. My name is Sam Gituku. Bye for now.
From a charcoal